WHGE 95.3 FM. Oh, something was missing. Try that again. WHGE 95.3 FM. Coming up, the Open Eye.
Those of us that indulge in or commit intellectual violence don't do so for the pleasure of mental masturbation or ego diddling. We do so because the chains of oppression on people's minds are deep and difficult to remove.
Good morning, my children of the sun. Welcome to the Open Eye on WHGE 95.3 FM. I'm your host, third eye optometrist, Patrice Gibbs, here to get that third eye open. Yes, indeed, I got something for you today. Gonna be some laser surgery up in here today. That's what's gonna happen. All right. Every generation has its purpose. Ours is to reveal the truth and reverse the brainwashing, and that we certainly do right here on the Open Eye. Yes, indeed. Let me tell you something. This week, America, once again, showed us exactly who it is when power feels threatened. In state after state, we are watching elected officials openly target black political power. Not quietly, not secretly, openly. Tennessee lawmakers moving to dismantle majority black districts while punishing legislators who protested. Louisiana scrambling to dilute black voting strength. Alabama trying to redraw maps again after courts already told them what discrimination looks like. And all of this happening while people still had the nerve to tell black folks racism is over. No, racism evolved. See, the old segregationists used dogs, hoses, and ropes. The modern version used legislation, court rulings, gerrymandering, school censorship, algorithmic propaganda, and media distraction. Same goal, just a different uniform. And while all this is happening, we're being encouraged to look everywhere except at the machinery itself. Celebrity gossip, viral nonsense, manufactured outrage, just endless distraction, BS. But the Open Eye was never built to entertain you into sleep. This platform exists to remind people that history is not dead. History is active. History is moving. History is sitting in legislative chambers right now drafting policy. And if you don't understand the connection between slavery, Reconstruction, Jim Crow, redlining, mass incarceration, voter suppression, and what is happening right now in 2026, then you are watching the movie without understanding the plot. I mean, let me say this clearly. Black people still here, still building, still thinking, still organizing, still surviving, still creating culture this country cannot function without. Still carrying spiritual endurance that empires have tried and failed to destroy for centuries. Because our history is not just oppression. Our history is resistance. From Congo Square to Tulsa, from Wilmington to Bowling, from Harriet Tubman to Fannie Lou Hamer, from jazz to hip hop, from freedom papers to freedom songs. We have always turned suffering into strategy and survival into art. So today's program is not about despair, it's about clarity. Because once you see clearly, you stop begging systems to save you and start building systems of your own. And that is dangerous to people who depend on your confusion. So stay with us today. Challenge your assumptions. Question everything. And remember, awareness without action is just another prison. I said it's the open eye. What's going on in here? All right. Get my disclaimer out the way. All righty. Hey, Steve.
The views and opinions expressed on the Open Eye are those of the hosts, guests, and contributors, and do not reflect the policy or position of WHGE 95.3 FM, nor our sponsor, the Delaware Center for Homeless Vets. Any content provided by Open Eye's hosts, guests, or contributors are theirs and are not intended to malign any religion, ethnic group, company, or individual.
All right. WHGE 95.3 FM is Patrice Gibbs. All right, let's get them started here. All right, let's get to work. We're going to start off with Bowley. All right. Bowley. The black sundown town, pretty boy Floyd should have feared. Okay, we're going to go to a place most Americans have never heard of, but every gangster in the 1930s should have respected. Bowley, Oklahoma. Bowley, Oklahoma is a town with a reputation so strong, so unmistakable that newspapers in the 1920s reported a sign at its border that read, "White man, don't let the sun set on you in Bowley." Yeah, that wasn't a threat. That was a warning. Okay. It was a declaration of sovereignty. A reminder that black people in Bowley were not waiting on permission to defend themselves, their land, or their institutions. See, Bowley wasn't just an all-black town. It was a black stronghold, a black economy, a black safe zone, and a black line in the sand. And this was during an era when white violence was the norm and black self-defense was treated like rebellion. And in 1932, one of America's most notorious gangsters learned exactly what that meant. On November 23rd, 1932, members of Pretty Boy Floyd's gang decided they were going to rob the Farmers and Merchants Bank in Bowley. Now, here's the funny part. Pretty Boy Floyd himself told them not to do it. He told them, hell, you don't know, and I know about them black people over in Bowley. You know they got that sign, right? You know they got that. Right? He knew Bowley's reputation. He knew the people stayed strapped. They stayed ready so they had to get ready. He knew the town wasn't scared of anybody, especially not some Depression-era outlaws. But his crew didn't listen. They pulled up anyway. And Bowley reminded them exactly where they were. Two of Floyd's men walked into the bank. Cashier Herbert McCormick saw what was happening, slipped into the vault and hit the alarm while grabbing a rifle. That alarm wasn't just a sound, it was a summons. The people of Bowley Business owners, farmers, laborers, law enforcement came running whatever they had on hand. Guns, tools, whatever could defend the town. A shootout erupted. Bank President B.J. Turner was tragically killed. But the robbers didn't make it out either. George Birdwell, dead. Charles Glass, dead. C.C. Patterson, wounded and captured. The gang's black getaway driver, who knew the town well, was also killed. And just like that, one of the most infamous criminal crews of the 1930s met their match. Not in Chicago, not in Kansas City, not in a federal ambush, but in a black town that refused to be a prey. Locals call it Bollywood, like in Waterloo. Yeah. Pretty boy Floyd called it the end of an era. Let me tell you why this story matters. Because Boley wasn't supposed to exist. Not in 1903. Not in Jim Crow, Oklahoma. Not in a country that burned black towns for sport. But Boley did exist, and it thrived because they had black banks, black newspaper, black businesses, black law enforcement, black landowners, black political power, and black armed self-defense. Don't let the sun go down on you in Boley, white boy. And it had that sign that told the truth. This is our town. This is our land. This is our safety. Respect it or keep moving. Boley was a reminder that Black America has a long, rich tradition of building, defending, and sustaining its own institutions. Not just the surviving violence, but repelling it. These are the stories they don't want you to hear. These are the stories we don't hear enough. These are the stories that rewrite the narrative. These are the stories that show who we've been and who we can still be. This is Open Eye. Hey, Sherry, I see you there, sister. All right. All right, Steve. Cool. This is from the internet. All right. WHGE 95.3 FM. Dope and I. Hey, let me tell you something. Because the way the political climate is going, it's something about our history that we need to recognize. And some of us don't realize. As bad as you think slavery was, it was a lot worse. A lot. Yeah, here's a quote from Ashley the Baroness. When she reported this, she said, this might be the one to get her banned from the platform. Because she was graphic with it. Now I quote, before a single ship left the coast of West Africa, okay, where they were going, yeah, right, who were going to be put on it, were already being processed. stripped naked, prodded, groped. Traders basically examined the beast. That was their feeling. They felt their breasts, their buttocks, vaginal areas of women and girls, allegedly to assess their childbearing ability. Men and boys were groped around the groin, the scrotum, and the anus. One white trafficker, who later testified, described the process as similar to what she would do to a horse before purchasing, before buying it. And these were human beings, y'all. They were being evaluated the way you would evaluate livestock. And when the evaluation was done, they were assigned a number, not a name, a number, and loaded on the ships. These ships were built into two categories: tight packers and loose packers. Tight packers maximize profit. Human beings were measured with instruments and charts that calculate how many bodies could be chained in a single row. The space allocated per person was roughly the size of a coffin. Men were shackled together in pairs at the wrists and ankles and placed into the hold, lying on their sides, unable to sit up, unable to turn over, unable to move. The heat in the hold was lethal and suffocating. There was almost no ventilation. The air was so thick with human waste, sweat, and disease that sailors reported being unable to breathe when they opened the hatch. Dysentery tore through entire decks. People vomited on each other. People had diarrhea on each other. People died chained to the person beside them and stayed there rotten until someone came to remove the body. Sometimes that took days. Smallpox spread, measles spread. The living were chained to the dead in spaces the size of coffins, and what historians describe as suffocating and unbearable conditions in the middle of the ocean. Women were kept unchained in separate compartments, not as mercy, but because being unchained made them easier to access. Crew members raped them throughout the voyage, not occasionally, routinely. Those who resisted were flogged. Women gave birth on those ships without medical care, without assistance in those conditions. Obviously, most newborns didn't survive. In one documented case, a captain punished a failed rebellion by killing one of the men involved immediately and forcing 2 other enslaved people to eat his heart and liver while the rest watched. This is the historical record, y'all. It's documented in historical accounts of the Middle Passage. About 15% of the people put on those ships, nearly 2 million human beings, died before they reached land. And some were thrown overboard alive, because maritime insurance paid for cargo lost at sea, not cargo that died of illness. You see, throwing people into the ocean alive was more profitable than letting them die of disease. The most documented case is the Zong massacre, in which a British captain threw 132 enslaved people into the ocean alive and then filed an insurance claim. The case went to court. The question before the court wasn't whether a crime had been committed. The question was whether the insurance policy covered the loss. The ones who survived the crossing arrived at a port and were processed again before they were sold. Mhm. And that was just the beginning of their journey into slavery. Mhm. Yeah. As bad as you think slavery was, it was a lot worse. Worse than the textbook paragraph. It was worse than the sanitized documentaries. It was worse than the word slavery even sounds. Because slavery wasn't just forced labor. It was industrialized torture. It was human beings turned into inventory, insured like cargo, bred like livestock, and raped as policy. Mutilated as punishment and worked to death for profit. It was mothers watching children sold away screaming. It was children born already owned. It was men beaten until their backs open. It was women whose bodies were treated as both labor machines and sexual property. It was people packed in the ships so tightly they suffocated in their own waste while chained to the dead. And even that description barely scratches the surface. Because the true horror of slavery is not just what was done physically, it's the psychological dimension. Imagine being stripped of your name, your language, your religion, your family history, your legal identity, your right to defend yourself, your right to read, your right to love freely, your right to keep your children, your right to your own body, and then being told by society doing it that this condition was natural, that you deserved it, that God ordained it, that your suffering built somebody else's civilization. That's not just oppression. That is the deliberate engineering of human despair. And the brutality was not accidental. It was systematic. The beatings were systematic. The rapes were systematic. The family separations were systematic. The starvation was systematic. The terror was systematic. This was the machine. A machine that turned African bodies into wealth powerful enough to build banks, ports, universities, railroads, insurance companies, Wall Street fortunes, and entire national economies throughout the Americas and Europe. And wait, what makes it even more horrifying is this. People adapted to it. Governments regulated it. Churches justified it. Scientists rationalized it. Courts protected it. Newspapers advertised it. Ordinary citizens normalized it. Human beings stood around auction blocks eating lunch while families were dismantled in front of them. That is how deep the moral catastrophe was. So when people casually say slavery happened a long time ago, they usually mean they have never truly sat with the magnitude of what happened. Because if you really understand it, not the fairy tale version, but the documented historical reality, you stop talking about slavery like it was merely an unfortunate chapter. You realize it was one of the greatest sustained crimes against humanity in recorded history. And you also realize something else. The people who survived it survived something beyond comprehension. It's a lot worse than you thought. This is The Open Eye. Patrice Gibbs. Hey, Vaughn, I see you there, brother. WHGE 95.3 FM. Kevin Hart, somebody need to kick your little ass. I'm glad Cat Williams roasted you right. Because he didn't just roast you, he told your sorry ass off, and he should have. Because what happened at that roast wasn't just a bad joke. It wasn't just a tasteless moment. You know what it was? It was a cultural x-ray. And what it revealed should shake your ass up, Kevin Hart. Because somewhere along the way, America decided that a black man's murder was entertainment. Somewhere along the way, George Floyd's final breaths, a man begging for his mother while the state crushed the life out of him, became raw material for white comedians to mine for applause. And the industry didn't blink. The room didn't freeze. The air didn't shift. Instead, they laughed. Let's start with the white comedians, the self-proclaimed rebels. And rebels. The so-called truth tellers. The ones who swear they push boundaries, they don't. They push our boundaries. They punch where it's safe, see? They punch where the industry will protect them. They punch where the backlash won't cost them a dime, because you'd have brung your ass around here with that crap, I'd have beat you to F up. Because these same comedians know exactly which tragedies they would never touch. They know exactly which communities they dare not offend. And they know exactly whose pain is sacred. But black death, black trauma, black suffering, that's still treated like public property, something they can remix, monetize, and mock without consequence. In the industry, well, the industry is complicit. It's like everybody sitting in there laughing was complicit. And it's always been complicit. From minstrel shows, the lynching postcards, the caricatures, to stereotypes, the edgy jokes about murdered black men. The machine has never stopped feeding on black pain. It just updated the packaging. Now let's talk about the part that cut deepest. Black celebrities sat there and laughed. People whose careers are built on the backs of black audiences. People who owe their fame to the communities that lifted them up. People who should have been the first to stand, the first to walk out, the first to say, not this, not him. Instead, they chuckled, they nodded, they played along. And in doing so, they sent a message louder than any punchline. Mock or did, we won't stop you. That's not just disappointing. That's betrayal. Because when the cameras stop rolling, when the applause fades, when the lights go out, those celebrities get to retreat to gated communities and security details. But what about the average black person? We still have to live in the America that killed George Floyd. We still have to survive the traffic stops. We still have to navigate the job interviews. We still have to raise children in a world where their innocence is never assumed. We still have to fight voter suppression book bans. They just ban roots. DEI rollbacks and systemic disrespect. So yes, when wealthy entertainers laugh at a joke about a murdered black man, it hits different. Feels like abandonment. Feels like the people with the biggest platforms forgot who they were supposed to be standing with. This final part, this is for the black audience watching all this unfold. Because they weren't just testing the comedians. They weren't just testing the celebrities, they were testing you. They wanted to see if you shrug it off. They wanted to see if you just keep streaming. They want to see if you keep buying tickets. They want to see if you keep supporting the very people who mock your pain. Because the truth is simple. They only respect the boundaries you enforce. That's why racist jokes happen with me once. You do that shit once, you'll never do it again. In black audiences, you have more power than you realize. You decide who becomes a star. You decide what goes viral. You decide what gets canceled and what gets rewarded. You decide which comedians get careers and which ones fade into irrelevance. Nothing in American entertainment moves without black cultural approval. Nothing. So this moment, this ugly, disrespectful moment is not just about a roast. It's about whether black people will continue to let the industry treat black death as disposable. Because if you don't draw the line, nobody else will. If you don't make the room go cold, the room will keep laughing. And if you don't say, not this, not him, not ever, then the machine will keep grinding. And that's the real question this moment forces us to confront. Will we keep letting them turn over our dead in the punchlines? Or will we finally draw the line in the sand and say, this ends here? Right now. WHGE 95.3 FM, the Open Eye. All right, I see you there, boy. Okay, I didn't say. All right, right along. Right. Oh, yeah. WHGE 95.3 FM, Open Eye. Y'all paying attention? Y'all been paying attention? All right, let me see if I get this. Let's see if I got this right here, if I got it correct. Okay, in Tennessee, Republicans didn't just try to draw black voters out of political power. They tried to draw black lawmakers out of political participation altogether. Same week, same legislature, same speaker, same agenda. First, Tennessee Republicans convened a special session to pass a law allowing mid-decade redistricting, because even the old laws standing in their way had to be bulldozed in order to redraw the map. And what was the target? Tennessee's only majority black congressional district. Then, when Democrats peacefully protested on the House floor, linking arms, speaking out, distributing earplugs during the chaos, Speaker Cameron Sexton retaliated by stripping every Democrat every committee assignment through November 2026. Every single Democrat. Yeah. Which means black lawmakers in Tennessee were removed from every committee where legislation is shaped, negotiated, debated, influenced. Nearly 2 million Tennesseans effectively lost representation at the decision-making table because Republicans didn't like the same. And the excuse? Well, they linked arms. They passed out earplugs. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not just about decorum. This is about rules. Yeah, I mean, it's not just about rules. This is not about civility. It's about power. Because when you remove black people from the map and then remove black lawmakers from the room, that is not governance. That's erasure. And Cameron Sexton, the Speaker of the Tennessee House, signed his name to it twice. Now let's deal with another dangerous misunderstanding floating around this country. People keep saying, oh, Republicans are scared of losing the midterms. No, that's not it. That's too small. That's too shallow. See, that gives you a little comfort. If this were only about surviving one election cycle, they wouldn't be obsessing over single districts in deeply red states. They wouldn't be fighting this hard to squeeze one more seat out of Tennessee, South Carolina, Alabama, Louisiana, or Florida. You know why they are fighting over every seat? Because every seat moves them closer to something much bigger, a 2/3 majority. And what happens when a movement gains enough power to dominate Congress and enough states? It gains the ability to fundamentally alter the Constitution itself. See, that's the long game. And before people say, oh, that sounds extreme, let's remember something. There are elected officials openly talking about overturning the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment to the United States, the amendment that passed after slavery to guarantee black people citizenship and equal protection under the law. The amendment that legally recognized black people as citizens in the United States is now being discussed as disposable by people sitting in positions of government authority. Do you understand how historically serious that is? Because if you attack voting rights, attack representation, attack majority black districts, attack diversity, attack protests, attack citizenship protections, and normalize the removal of black political power, then what you are witnessing is not random policy disagreements. You're witnessing the destruction of the second Reconstruction. And history teaches us something terrifying. Every time America has expanded black political power, there has been a backlash movement dedicated to crushing it. Reconstruction, Jim Crow, mass incarceration, voter suppression, gerrymandering, book bans, DEI attacks, now this. Different centuries, same disease. And the most dangerous part is not that they are doing it. The most dangerous part is how many people are pretending not to see it. The map is being redrawn. The room is being cleared, and too many Americans are still arguing over whether the fire alarm is loud enough. What you have to understand is the end goal. And if you don't, you're naive. Because the end goal is our enslavement. Open your eye. I'm Patrice Gibbs. Hey, Brother Jardé, I see you there, bro. WHGE 95.3 FM, the open eye. Yes, the time is here. Yeah, I'm going to cut a little short today, y'all, but I'm not going to leave you hanging. I don't know if you, many of you see this Muslim white man, Irish German, but he talks like he spent time in the Nation of Islam. King Bolson. I'm going to quote him here. I'm going to break it down. All right. And Bolson said, I'm telling you, be a state inside a state. Be a nation within the nation. Be a country within a country. A parallel structure, a parallel system, a parallel economy. Why, in this day and age, you could even think about a parallel black currency in the United States that would eventually become global. Because we got $2 trillion spending dollars. Now I continue to quote. Like I said, the proof that you can build is already in your inheritance. Greenwood is proof. Wilmington is proof. The UNIA is proof. The Black Panther Party is proof. Do you understand? Every single one of those projects demonstrates capacity, remarkable capacity, that the American empire and the white power structure could not match and could only destroy by force, only by force. You come from a people who build things. You come from people who build those things. You had that in your genes. You had that in your inheritance. You already have proof of a concept in hand. Mm-hmm. I got all that. Yeah, okay. Let me break this down, my children of the sun. Let me remind you of something this country rarely teaches and never celebrates. Within 10 years after the Civil War, black communities began to sprout across this nation. 10 years, not a century, not a lifetime, 10 years. Of people who had been legally defined as property were building towns, buying land, forming governments, and shaping their own future. Within 10 years, black economic power became a reality. Freed men and women, many of whom had never been allowed to touch a dollar that belonged to them, were opening businesses, forming cooperatives, building banks, and circulating wealth inside their own communities. They were turning wages into ownership and ownership into stability. Within 10 years, black political power began to rise, not in whispers, not in votes, not in theory, but in office. In 10 years, black people gained political literacy. Black legislators, black sheriffs, black congressmen, leaders who emerged from communities that had in a single decade built the political literacy and civic strength to challenge the old order. Within 10 years, black scholars were opening minds. Howard, Fisk, Hampton, institutions built by people who understood that education was not a luxury. It was liberation. It was strategy. It was survival. And they built it under conditions designed to break them. And let's be clear. Within 10 years, the trajectory was unmistakable. People who had been enslaved were becoming a political bloc, an economic force, and a cultural vanguard. And that is exactly why the backlash came. Not because black people failed, but because black people succeeded. The overthrow of Reconstruction was not destiny. It was a reaction, a violent reaction to black excellence, black organization, and black acceleration. But here's the part they don't want you to hear. Those 10 years proved something. They proved that capacity was never the issue. Imagination was never the issue. Discipline was not the issue. The issue was power, who had it, who feared it, and who feared losing it, and what they were willing to do to stop a rising people. So the refrain echoes forward to you. Within 10 years, our ancestors built institutions under surveillance. Within 10 years, they built prosperity under threat. Within 10 years, they built political coalitions under constant attack. So what does that mean for a generation standing at the front end of an era of decentralization? An era future historians will study as one of the greatest openings in modern age. What's that I like to say? Can't be lucky all the time, but you can be smart every day. It means the blueprint is already written. It means the timeline for transformation has never been centuries. It's always been 10 years. The question is not whether you can. History already answered that. We know we can. The question is, will you? This is The Open Eye. I'm Patrice Gibbs. All right, I got ready to roll. All right, but as we close out today's broadcast, I want you to remember something. The struggle for truth has never been a popularity contest. People who tell the truth are almost always called divisive before history finally admits they were right. There was a time when speaking against slavery was considered radical. A time when demanding voting rights was considered dangerous. A time when teaching black history was considered a threat to America, and it still is. Because here we are again. But understand this. Truth does not stop being true because powerful people become uncomfortable hearing. And discomfort is exactly what happens when illusion collides with reality. Today we talked about power, about history, about resistance, about the deliberate attempts to erase memory, erase political strength, erase community, and erase context. But erasure only works when people forget. That's why memory matters. That's why study matters. That's why community matters. That's why independent black media matters. Because if somebody controls your understanding of the past, they can control your expectations for the future. And that's why the open eye exists. Not to tell you what to think, but to encourage you to think deeper. To look beneath the headline, to question the narratives, to examine who benefits from confusion, and to understand that freedom requires vigilance, especially now. So protect your mind, protect your spirit, protect your community, and do not let this world normalize injustice simply because it repeats it often. I hope you learned something today, because I learned something before I got here. As we always tell you, destiny determines who enters your life, but you decide who stays. Therefore, value those who value you, and don't treat those as a priority who treat you as an option. I'm Patrice Gibbs. This has been The Open Eye on WHGE 95.3 FM. Thanks for joining us. Peace. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. African in your heart. Because you know global African supremacy as you watch the American empire fall. Global African supremacy will be a reality. Peace.